Hello and welcome to Mary Live. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle. My friends in Jesus and Mary, it really gives me great joy to speak about a saint you really have to meet if you have not already met her. She is the thaumaturga of the 19th century. Thaumaturga means miracle worker or wonder worker. That's an expression by Pope Gregory XVI. The best way I can compare her is she's the Padre Pio of the 19th century. But she wishes, and she has been making her miraculous presence known right now in the 21st century. And I'm talking about Saint Philomena, a saint very dear to my heart. We named our 8th child, Philomena. But far more importantly, she has to be dear to all of our hearts because she is such a powerful intercessor for purity, for chastity, for the youth of today. And we're going to go through the history of how St. Philomena was raised to the altars of the church, the popes who have praised her, and the different titles and plenary indulgences that they have given her, particularly in the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Also, we'll discuss the private revelation, which at that time was approved by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, at that time the Holy Office, of the real background of St. Philomena. We'll talk about very briefly the controversy, why some say, well, I thought St. Philomena was, quote, desainted. I thought she's not a saint anymore. This is absolutely not true. And fortunately, Pope Francis had a statue, a beautiful statue of St. Philomena at a Wednesday audience in May of 2023, and spoke to the rector of Mugnano, which is a city, little town close to Naples, where the headquarters of devotion to St. Philomena derives from and where her remains are present, and spoke favorably about St. Philomena. So, who is St. Philomena? I'm going to push this back just a little bit. Who is St. Philomena? Why is she a saint? You need to know. In your own cases, for the youth in your families, for the youth throughout the world. Also, her intercession is very prominent for marriages, even for financial challenges. So, how does St. Philomena enter the historical ecclesial picture? Well, let's go back to May 24th of 1802. And in the catacombs of Priscilla, workers are working in what was known as the Greek chapel, a chapel with many Greek remains. And they discovered a, up to that point, undiscovered tomb. The tombs were called locutus. It's like a little opening hewn in the rock. And they found the following inscription. The inscription was Lumina pax te cum fi. Okay, so from left to right, Lumina pax te cum fi. But it was typical fashion in the catacombs that they would start with the second tile. And if you start with the second tile, it says pax te cum fi lumina. Peace to you, peace be with you, Philomena. So as the workers discovered this on May 24th, 1802, they called the Vatican expert, Monsignor Ludovici, who came on May 25th, 1802, and verified that this was indeed a Roman martyr. Why? Because they found a vial of blood inside the tomb, which was the typical way that the early church indicated a martyr. Also significant on the tomb were these symbols: an anchor, a palm branch, which also indicated martyrdom, and arrows as well. You know, with the anchor and the arrows, there was more questions about why they were there. But the palm branch and the vial certainly make reference that she was an early church martyr. So a few years later, in 1805, Father De Lucia, a pastor in the little town of Mugnano, asked the Holy Father through his bishop if they could get relics of an early martyr because he found that his parish was growing weak in faith. So Father de Lucia was granted permission to take the bones of Saint Philomena to his parish in Mugnano. And almost immediately, the miraculous begins, because as Father de Lucia is returning in carriage, and the box with the remains, with the bones of Saint Philomena are under the carriage, he hears this repeated knocking that goes on, and he doesn't know where it's coming from. Then it dawns on him it's coming from the extended reliquary, the box with the relics, and then he realizes that perhaps it's not too dignified to have her under the carriage. He takes the box, puts it next to himself, and the knocking ceases. This will be important later as we talk about the, at that time, church-approved private revelation explaining her life. Well, the miracles start immediately. They get to Mugnano. The church bells start. It's Our Lady of Grace Parish. The church bells start ringing without anybody ringing them. The town paralytic is immediately healed, even though he's not even in the church. He's not in immediate proximity. And he comes running into the church. Everyone can't believe that's happening. One mother dips oil in from the lamp burning next to the tomb of Saint Philomena, applies that to the eye of her blind son, and he is miraculously cured. I am not exaggerating, and these are all documented in the parish archives of Our Lady of Grace, also confirmed by Bishop de Cesare, the bishop at the time. Miracle after miracle after miracle, just a plethora of miracles. And so fame, religious fame about the effects of Philomena and anything related to going to Mugnano begins to spread throughout the region, but he's also throughout all of Italy. And Bishop de Cesare starts sending dust from the bones of Philomena to different places, and they all report these remarkable miracles. And so he reports this to what was the Holy Office then. Now it's the dicastery, right, for the doctrine of faith. And the Holy Office conducts its own experiment. So they take the bone dust of Saint Philomena and the bone dust, at that time just Philomena, but of course Saint in the eyes of heaven, but not yet canonized in these early years. And the bone dust from another Roman martyr and Philomena's, and they send it out to different dioceses. And they find A, that the miracles are happening with the bone dust of Philomena, and B, that the dust is not depleting. This was something that Bishop de Cesare reported to the congregations. I'm saying this dust out, it's not going away. I still have the same amount of dust. They did so, and they confirmed that this was truly a miracle. So just a great series, and again, medically documented miracles happen throughout this region. Well, one event brings this plethora of miracles to really a climactic moment, and this is the miraculous curing of Pauline Jaricot. Now, Pauline Jaricot was very well known in the Vatican and very well known by Pope Gregory XVI because she was from a wealthy French aristocratic family, and she started what became the Propaganda Fide. Now, the Propaganda Fide was the Vatican congregation that had funds and efforts towards missionary activity. Well, that started with Pauline Jaricot. Pauline Jaricot went to all the textile factories in Paris and the outskirts and asked everyone to just donate a penny a week for the missions. And it was so successful that it was soon after taken over by the Vatican. Now it's even related to the Congregation for Evangelization. But at age 34, she had heart failure in a very serious way, and she was very close friends with St. John Vianney. St. John Vianney was clearly the greatest devotee of St. Philomena during his life. And so Vianney says, go down to Mugnano and ask for a miracle. And all the doctors say, you'll never make it to Mugnano. But Pauline Jaricot decides to do just that. But on the way, she passes by the Vatican to have a meeting with Pope Gregory XVI, but she's too ill to attend the audience. And so the Pope comes to her, the convent where she's staying, Sacred Heart Convent, and basically says, the Pope says, when she looks so sickly, when you're in heaven, pray for the church. And Pauline says, I will, but if I come back on foot after being cured by St. Philomena, will you finally raise her to the altar of the church? The Holy Father says, well, of course, because that will be a first-class miracle. But as he leaves, he tells the sister, we will not see her again because death is so apparently so imminent to her physical state. Well, August 8th, 1835, she goes down to Milano. She can't speak anymore. She's brought to the masses that take place on August 8th. Nothing happens. The next day, August 9th, also Mass and Adoration. Nothing happens. The local Italians, with the unique charism of Southern Italian intercessory prayer, start threatening St. Philomena, saying, if you don't cure this woman, we won't pray to you anymore. We'll have nothing to do with you, which is a little bit of an old style of intercessory prayer. But on August 10th, during benediction, Pauline Jericho is completely miraculously cured. And the next day, she starts on foot from Naples, Mugnano specifically, to Rome. That's a pretty good jaunt on foot. It's about a 2.5-hour train ride. She walks into the Pope unannounced, and the Pope thinks it's an apparition. But the Pope asks Pauline Jericho to stay in Rome for at least a year, to verify that this was in fact a miracle. She does so. And then on January 13th, 1837, Pope Gregory XVI, solely in virtue of the undeniable historical and medical documentation of the miraculous through her intercession, raises her to the altar of the church, canonizes her by allowing public veneration of St. Philomena, giving her a mass dedicated to St. Philomena. And, there's two ways of canonization. One is the formal process, but the other way is what's called sometimes equivalent canonization. That's where the Pope takes it in his own hands and sees that there's evidence based on both heroic virtue or a miracle. Now, St. John Paul II, I don't want to get into too many details here, but just so you realize how absolutely St. Philomena is a saint, Pope John Paul II said, you can have heroic virtue or you can have martyrdom. You don't need both. And then to be considered in this process. And then, of course, a miracle is what leads one to become a blessed. And then you need another miracle after that designation to become a saint. Well, there were hundreds of documented miracles, and he saw one right before his eyes, which is the walking back of Pauline Jericho. So Gregory the 16th raises her to the altar of the church, calls her the thaumaturga, the wonder worker for the church, and then a whole series of other popes continue this process. So, for example, Pope Blessed Pius IX had a great devotion to St. Philomena. Soon before his death, he took off his pectoral cross and had it put on the tomb of St. Philomena. He even went to the tomb of St. Philomena as his first course when he had to flee the Vatican in 1849 and was asking for her intercession for his ability to basically return to the Vatican Papal States and to the Vatican itself. Leo XIII raised the Archconfraternity of St. Philomena. And remember now, there's good people could differ on this a little bit, but many believe that infallibility is exercised by the Pope when he raises someone to the altars of the church. So, and it's certainly something that you can't take away after this has happened. Well, Pope St. Pius X also had great devotion to St. Philomena and said St. Philomena it's clear in virtue of the miracles, who she is, but also look at St. John Vianney, who attributed all his miracles to St. Philomena. And I mention that because it was during the time of Pius X that a controversy first started regarding, bringing doubt into the reality and the truth of St. Philomena. I'll get to that in just a moment. But this ongoing devotion of St. Philomena, which included at that time a plenary indulgence for wearing the cord of St. Philomena. We'll speak of that as well. There were 4 or 5 days where you could get a plenary indulgence, all based on the discovery of St. Philomena's tomb, May 24th, May 25th, the final the declaration that she was indeed a martyr. August 11th is the day that is St. Philomena's feast day. It is the day that Pope Gregory XVI made the declaration, or assigned that day, so to speak. Of course, the declaration was made on January 13th of 1837. So now, all of these, because in 1968 there was a new Enchiridion, all of these have not been continued as plenary indulgences. But it doesn't mean that they're, especially the cord and the oil, which we'll talk about, are not replete with graces in virtue of the fact that you're talking about a real saint. Now, let's get to the private revelation confirmation. Now, remember, the private revelation doesn't establish her sanctity. That has to happen by the Holy Father. And when people say, well, there's no history to St. Philomena, there is absolutely a history to her. First of all, it's the history of her miracles. That's history. That's clear, documentable events happening through St. Philomena's intercession. But I do want to read to you, and this will take a little time. I don't typically do this, but honestly, I think St. Philomena is so worth it, and I want you to hear this so it moves your heart to make room for this great saint in your prayers, in your heart, and really for your needs, because we all have so many needs. So what happens is in August of 1833, this is still 2 years before the miraculous healing of Pauline Jericho, 3 people in Italy at the same time, without any communication to the others, without any knowledge that the others were receiving, began receiving locutions from St. Philomena. And they all were in complete harmony. I want to read to you the most important of those. These were locutions given to a sister Luisa, and the context is important here for your own credibility. There was a statue of Saint Philomena, which is interesting because she's not declared a saint until 1835, but in 1833 there were statues of Saint Philomena throughout Italy. A statue begins speaking to her, and she gets very concerned, and she tells her religious superior what's taking place. Should I add more prayer and fasting? And the superior wisely said, well, what is she saying? And she gave her some of the details. Now, Sister Luisa, to her superior, gave her some details about what was being reportedly said through these locutions. And some of them described very specific details regarding Father de Lucia's trip home from Rome to Mugnano, details that no one knew. So the Mother Superior wisely contacted Father de Lucia and said, look, this is happening. This sister says she's receiving locutions, and here are some details of what she's saying is coming from St. Philomena. Can you confirm these? And Father de Lucia said, this is exactly how it happened. Tell her to be opened for anything else that would come. And one of the specifics that was mentioned was the knocking that St. Philomena revealed to Sister Lucia, that indeed she was knocking so that she would not be underneath the carriage but be raised to a more dignified place. So through this process and through this openness, Sister Lucia then receives and records the following account. Now this is a couple pages, so but again, I think it's worth it. Get comfortable. Let me just read this to you on what Sister Lucia receives from St. Philomena. And again, the Holy Office confirmed this as the legitimate locution back in early 1830s. So this is the original text. My dear sister, I am the daughter of a prince who governed a small state in Greece. My mother is also of royal blood. My parents were without children. They were idolaters. They continually offered sacrifices and prayers to their false gods. A doctor from Rome named Publius lived in the palace and in the service of my father. The doctor professed Christianity. Seeing the affliction of my parents, by the impulse of the Holy Spirit, he spoke to them of Christianity and promised to pray for them if they consented to receive baptism. The grace which accompanied his words enlightened their understanding and triumphed over their will. They became Christians and obtained the long-desired happiness that Publius had assured them as the reward of their conversions. At the moment of my birth, they gave me the name Lumina, an allusion to the light of faith of which I had been, as it were, the fruit. The day of my baptism they called me Philomena, or daughter of light, because on that day I was born to the faith. The affection which my parents bore me was so great that they had me always with them. It was on this account that they took me to Rome on a journey that my father was obliged to make on the occasion of an unjust war with which he was threatened by the haughty Diocletian. I was then 13 years old. On our arrival in the capital of the world, we proceeded to the palace of the emperor and were admitted for an audience. As soon as Diocletian saw me, his eyes were fixed upon me. He appeared to be prepossessed in this manner during the entire time that my father was stating with animated feelings everything that could serve for his defense. As soon as father had ceased to speak, the emperor desired him to be disturbed no longer, to banish all fear, to think only of living in happiness. These are the emperor's words, quote, I shall place at your disposal all the force of the empire. I ask only one thing, that is the hand of your daughter. My father, dazzled with an honor he was far from expecting, willingly acceded on the spot to the proposal of the emperor. When we returned to our own dwelling, father and mother did all they could to induce me to yield to Diocletian's wishes and theirs. I cried, do you wish that for the love of a man I should break the promise I have made to Jesus Christ? My virginity belongs to him. I can no longer dispose of it. But you were young then, too young, answered my father, to have formed such an engagement. He joined the most terrible threats to the command that he gave me to accept the hand of Diocletian. The grace of my God rendered me invincible, and my father, not being able to make the emperor relent, in order to disengage himself from the promise he had given, was obliged by Diocletian to bring me to the imperial chamber. I had to withstand for some time beforehand a new attack from my father's anger. My mother, uniting her efforts to his, endeavored to conquer my resolution. Caresses, threats, everything was employed to reduce me to compliance. At last I saw both of my parents fall at my knees and say to me with tears in their eyes, my child, have pity on your father, your mother, your country, our subjects. No, no, I answered them. My virginity, which I have vowed to God, comes before everything, before you, before my country. My kingdom is heaven. My words plunged them into despair, and they brought me before the emperor, who on his part did all in his power to win me. But his promises, his allurements, his threats were equally useless. He then threw into a violent fit of anger and, influenced by the devil, had me cast into one of the prisons of the palace, where he had me loaded with chains. Thinking that pain and shame would weaken the courage with which my divine spouse inspired me, he came to see me every day. After several days, the emperor issued an order for my chains to be loosed, that I might take a portion of bread and water. He rekindled his attacks, some of which would have been fatal to purity had it not been for the grace of God. The defeats which he always experienced were for me the preludes to new tortures. Prayer supported me. I did not cease to recommend myself to Jesus and to his most pure mother. My captivity had lasted 37 days when, in the midst of a heavenly light, I saw Mary holding the divine Son in her arms. "My daughter," she said to me, 3 days more of prison, and after 40 days you shall leave this state of pain." Such happy news made my heart beat with joy, but as the Queen of Angels had added that I should quit my prison to sustain in frightful torments a combat far more terrible than those preceding, I fell instantly from joy to the most cruel anguish. I thought it would kill me. Quote, "Have courage, my child," Mary then said to me. "Are you unaware of the love of predilection that I bear for you? The name which you received at baptism is the pledge of it for the resemblance which it has to that of my Son and to mine. You are called Lumina, as your spouse is called Light, star, sun, as I myself am called Aurora, star, the moon, in fullness of its brightness, and sun. Fear not, I will aid you. Now nature, whose weakness humbles you, asserts its law. In the moment of combat, grace will come to lend you its force, and your angel, who was also mine, Gabriel, whose name expresses strength, will come to your aid." Now, stay with me. I know this is long for a read, but it's well worth it. I will recommend you especially to his care as the well-beloved among my children." End quote. These words of the Queen of Virgins gave me courage again, and the vision disappeared. Leaving my prison filled with a celestial perfume, I experienced a joy out of this world, something indefinable. When the Queen of Angels had prepared me for what was soon experienced, Diocletian, despairing on bending me, decided on public chastisement to offend my virtue. He condemned me to be stripped and scourged like the spouse I preferred to him. These are his horrifying words. Quote, "Since she is not ashamed to prefer to an emperor like me, a malefactor condemned to an infamous death by his own people, she deserves that my justice shall treat her as he was treated." The prison guards hesitated to unclothe me entirely, but they did tie me to a column in the presence of the great men of the court. They lashed me with violence until I was bathed in blood. My whole body felt like one open wound, but I did not faint. The tyrant had me dragged back to the dungeon, expecting me to die. I hoped to join my heavenly spouse. 2 angels, shining with light, appeared to me in the darkness. They poured a soothing balm on my wounds, bestowing on me a vigor I did not have before that torture. When the emperor was informed of the change that had come over me, he had me brought before him. He viewed me with a greedy desire and tried to persuade me that I owed my healing and regained vigor to Jupiter, another god that he, the emperor, had sent to me. He attempted to impress me with his belief that Jupiter desired me to be Empress of Rome. Joining to these seductive words promises of great honor, including the most flattering words, Diocletian tried to caress me fiendishly. He attempted to complete the work of hell which he had begun. The divine spirit to whom I am indebted for constancy in preserving my purity seemed to fill me with light and knowledge. And to all the proofs which I gave of the solidity of our faith, neither Diocletian or his courtiers could find an answer. So remember now, this is a 13-year-old girl who is having this incredible superhuman virtue and courage and strength, but also articulating the faith in such ways that she is confounding the enemies. Then the frenzied emperor dashed at me, commanding a guard to chain an anchor around my neck and bury me deep in the waters of the Tiber. The order was executed. I was cast into the water, but God sent me 2 angels who unfastened the anchor. It fell into the river mud, where it remains no doubt to the present time. The angels transported me gently in full view of the multitude upon the riverbank. I came back unharmed, not even wet, after being plunged with the heavy anchor. When a cry of joy rose from the debauchers on the shore, and so many embraced Christianity by proclaiming their belief in my God, Diocletian attributed my preservation to secret magic. Then the emperor had me dragged through the streets of Rome and shot with a shower of arrows. My blood flowed, but I did not faint. Diocletian thought I was dying and commanded the guards to carry me back to the dungeon. Heaven honored me with a new favor there. I fell into a sweet sleep, and I found myself on waking perfectly cured. Diocletian learned about it. Well then, he cried in a fit of rage, let her be pierced with sharp darts a second time, and let her die in that torture. They hastened to obey him. Again, the archers bent their bows. They gathered all their strength, but the arrows refused to second their intentions. The emperor was present. In a rage, he called me a magician. And thinking that the action of fire could destroy the enchantment, ordered the darts to be made red in a furnace and directed against my heart. He was obeyed, but these darts, after having passed through a part of the space which they were to cross to come to me, took a quite contrary direction and returned to strike those by whom they had been hurled. 6 of the archers were killed by them. Several among them renounced paganism, and people began to render public testimony to the power of God that protected me. These murmurs and acclamations infuriated the tyrant. He determined to hasten my death by ordering my head to be cut off. My soul took flight towards my heavenly spouse, who placed me with the crown of virginity and the palm of martyrdom into a distinguished place among the elect. The day that was so happy for me and saw me enter into glory was Friday, the 3rd hour after midday, the same hour that saw my divine master expire. So the reason I read that, I hope it's as inspiring to you as it is to me, is that it also manifests very clear historical confirmations. First of all, Diocletian was known for killing Christians by tying an anchor around their neck and throwing it into the Tiber. Be interesting with these low tides whether we can find the anchor of Philomena. At any rate, that's a documented truth of Diocletian. Moreover, Diocletian also used arrows, shooting arrows into Christians to kill them as well. And therefore, the indications on the tomb of Philomena, the anchor and the arrows. So, and once again, this was confirmed as accurate, and 2 other people had similar locutions, but Sister Luisa's was the most prominent. So all of this leads to her equivalent canonization in 1837. Now, St. John Vianney, once again, who himself was a wonder worker, he attributed all of his miracles to St. Philomena. And as people would come far and wide, and again, in St. John Vianney's process of canonization, there are documented miracles to St. Philomena. In fact, St. John Vianney says on several occasions, St. Philomena appeared to him. Okay, so now I just want to summarize the evidence of her authenticity and of her canonization. Popes, private revelation, saints saying that she appeared to him, that would all have to be wrong and false, and for some even, the infallible act of the Pope in raising someone to the altar of the church, believed by many. Versus what? Versus a controversy that would happen in 1961. Okay, what's the controversy? Well, 1961, a congregation committee sought to remove feast days of the church that were either repetitive or that, in their opinion, lacked historical accuracy. Well, in 1961, the Feast of St. Philomena on August 11th was removed from the calendar, in large part to a 1903 investigation by an archaeologist named Marucci. And Marucci went to the tomb of Philomena and said, "Oh, this is false." And the reason he said it was false is he said, well, because the tomb that starts with her name, Pax Tecum Philomena, it's starting with the second tile. And that means that these 3 tile covers, terracotta tile covers, were reused. This was really referring to someone else, and so we can't be sure the person in here is Philomena, and so we nixed that. Now, I have to say, with as strong exclamation as I can say without voice raising, this was the most ridiculous conclusions because, first of all, Marucci never went to the tomb. This was all research that he did from afar. So I think I mentioned he went to the tomb. He never went to the tomb. Secondly, it was established custom that the name of the martyr or the person would start with the second tile. So, you've got Pax Te, cum fi lumina, starting with the second tile. Peace be with you, Philomena. Thirdly, it was examined in 2005 by an internationally renowned archaeologist who verified that based on the terracotta outside, there's no way it could have been reused. It was only sealed once and released once. So based on a absolutely groundless archaeological attack, for lack of a better term, as well as the lack of personal history, Philomena was taken off the calendar. She was in no sense removed as a saint with the legitimacy of public veneration. How do we know? Because the shrine in Mugnano continued to be revered, and Paul VI, when approached by an archbishop from India, Archbishop Fernandez, said, there's confusion. What should we do? And Paul VI said, continue devotion as before. Well, fortunately, we know as recently as this last May of 2023, that Pope Francis continues devotion to Saint Philomena, having a statue of Saint Philomena right there at the Wednesday audience and talking about the fruitfulness of devotion to Saint Philomena. Now, going back just for a moment to Pope Saint Pius X, when Marucci made this false claim, he said, well, the greatest evidence for Saint Philomena, Saint John Vianney. You got to go Chique Chechen with this and flip it on its head. That means that a canonized saint had false statements about Saint Philomena appearing to him. So you've got massive evidence on all levels: theology, archaeology, private revelation, papal authority, versus one misguided archaeologist. And perhaps the committee in 1961 not realizing that St. Philomena is historical, even in a public dimension, based on the documentation of her miracles. So why so much on St. Philomena? Because the St. Philomena website is getting, at last that I heard, about 1 million hits a year. And a lot of the hits are from young people. Why? Because, and this is why I wanted you to hear her story, which I certainly believe to be authentic, although that's not why she was canonized, right? It wasn't based on the private revelation. It was based on the historicity of the miraculous, which is how you get saints to be confirmed as saints in every case. It is a clear case of heroic efforts by a young person, 13 years old, to stay pure and chaste, even without the support of her parents. How many of our youth are in that situation right now? That sadly, they do not have the support of their parents, nor do they have the faith support of their parents. That's why I think St. Philomena is making such a strong comeback, and she absolutely is. There are so many new people are writing to me all the time talking about how they're naming their children Philomena. Young people, people at both Ave Maria campus and Franciscan University campus, newly married, naming their kids Philomena. It's a beautiful thing, but it's not just nostalgia. It's because St. Philomena has a role right now. She wants to be a wonder worker, a miracle worker of purity and grace for us right now in the midst of the challenges of today. So just a quick word about the two principal devotions to St. Philomena. The first is the cord. The cord of St. Philomena And you can get this. You can certainly get it by going to St. Philomena website from Mugnano, Italy, and they send out the cord. You can get it at other places too, I'm sure. But it is a red and white wool cord that you wrap around your waist for purity. And at the end of the cord, there's 2 knots, making reference to both virginity and martyrdom in honor of St. Philomena. So you don't have to do anything. There's no ceremony for the cord. You can have the cord blessed by a priest or a deacon. I've been wearing a cord for 30 years. They're beautiful testaments to asking St. Philomena constantly for the great gift of purity. Secondly, the oil of St. Philomena. The oil of St. Philomena should come from the shrine of Mugnano, and they do send it out because it's the oil that burns from the lamp in proximity to the remains of St. Philomena. And that's why it's important that it be that oil, because it's getting those sacramental blessings by being so close to the tomb of St. Philomena. I have heard many people, I've done many radio shows, several radio shows on St. Philomena, and people calling in and saying, we've had healings through the oil. A consistent theme of graces through the oil, blessings, are children with night terrors. For those who are unfamiliar, it's when children wake up just screaming. And then the application of the oil of St. Philomena has been a great aid for that. But Blessed Anna Maria Taigi used the oil of St. Philomena for her granddaughter when her granddaughter needed a healing. And in fact, the healing took place. So there's also a chaplet of St. Philomena, a very simple chaplet. That was also, both the cord and the chaplet came from St. John Vianney. And that's a chaplet where you pray 3 Our Fathers and then 13 Hail Marys, just in honor of the 13 years of St. Philomena. There's also a novena to St. Philomena. And if you're a longtime viewer, you realize I don't promote my own books. I just have my own personal thing that if a book that I've done is of value, it'll get word without me having to mention. I'm going to make the exception just with this because I want you to have access to what I just read, the account, the history, the theology, the papal approval, and also the novena. And St. John of Vianney also did a litany of St. Philomena. And it's a little book called It's Time to Meet St. Philomena. And you can get this little book by going to motherofallpeoples.com and are also on net with basic ways you can get books. But if you want to have what I basically summarized in this talk, and I'm grateful for your patience in going this long. It's longer than I usually do with Mary Live, but St. Philomena is worth it, my friends. You want to incorporate her because we all know young people in need of prayers. But it's not exclusive to young people because her miracles cured people of all ages and of all types. So let's bring St. Philomena, the thaumaturga, as Pope Gregory XVI called her, let's bring her into the 21st century by you and I bringing her into our hearts, into our prayers, and letting the wonders of St. Philomena bring new graces to our families, to our youth, to the people we know can use her intercession. St. Philomena, pray for us. God bless you.